The crystal chandeliers of Le Magnifique hung like frozen constellations above the dining room, casting fractured light across white linen tablecloths and polished silver. It was the kind of restaurant where the silence itself felt expensive, where conversations happened in murmurs, where the clink of stemware against porcelain sounded like music composed for the obscenely wealthy. Elena Vasquez moved between tables like a ghost, 24 years old, dark hair pulled into a severe bun, uniform pressed to perfection. She carried a silver tray balanced on her fingertips, her posture impeccable, her expression professionally blank. To the guests who glanced up from their Wagyu beef and $1,800 bottles of Burgundy, she was nothing more than a pair of hands delivering bread plates, invisible, forgettable, part of the furniture. None of them knew. None of them could have guessed that the young woman refilling their water glasses held a master's degree in art history and archaeological studies from the Sorbonne, that she could read ancient Greek, Latin, and Aramaic, that she had once spent 3 months in the restoration archives of the British Museum, cataloging Byzantine manuscripts that hadn't been touched in 2 centuries. But that was before her mother's cancer diagnosis, before the medical bills began arriving like artillery shells, each one more devastating than the last, before Elena watched her savings, her research fellowship, and her future disappear into the insatiable maw of American healthcare, before she held her mother's hand in a hospice bed in Queens, watching the strongest woman she had ever known fade to nothing. That was 18 months ago. Now, Elena owed $127,000 in debt. Her student loans were in default. Her credit was destroyed. The apartment she shared with 2 roommates cost more than half her monthly income. And every night she put on this crisp white shirt and black apron and served Dover sole to hedge fund managers who spent more on wine than she earned in a month. "Table 14 needs the check," Marco, the floor manager, said as he swept past her. He didn't look at her. Nobody looked at her. Elena nodded and retrieved the leather bill folder from the service station. As she walked toward table 14, she passed a display case near the restaurant's entrance, an ornate glass cabinet showcasing what the management called their heritage collection, antique silverware, Victorian tea services, and tonight, something new. A small bronze sculpture, maybe 8 inches tall, depicting a Greek athlete in mid-throw. She paused for half a second, looked at the piece. Something cold moved through her chest. "No," she told herself, "you're not that person anymore. You're a waitress. Just deliver the check." She kept walking, but the thought stayed with her. That bronze, something about the patina, something about the proportions. A whisper from another life, another Elena, the scholar, the expert, a woman who could identify a forgery from across a room. She crushed the thought down and delivered the check to table 14 with a practiced smile. "Thank you for dining with us," she said. The couple didn't acknowledge her. They were already gathering their coats, their minds on the opera tickets in his pocket, on the party they would attend afterward, on the glittering world that existed just beyond the reach of people like Elena. She watched them leave. Then she collected the signed receipt, noted the 12% tip with a small, resigned sigh, and moved to clear the next table. In the kitchen, she ate her staff meal standing up, leftover risotto, cold and congealed. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from a debt collector. 1 voicemail from the hospital, reminding her of her overdue balance. Elena closed her eyes. Just get through tonight, she told herself. 1 shift at a time. When she opened her eyes, Marco was standing in the doorway. "Private room B," he said. "VIP booking. 8 guests. They specifically requested our best server." He looked at her with something approaching respect, or at least the absence of contempt. "That's you tonight. Don't screw it up." Elena set down her fork. "Who's the booking?" "Victor Ashworth." The name hit her like ice water. Victor Ashworth, billionaire industrialist, collector of antiquities. The man who had purchased the Antikythera bronze replica at auction 3 years ago for $47 million, a price that had made international headlines. His private collection was legendary. His reputation was formidable, and tonight, Elena would be serving him water. She straightened her apron and followed Marco toward Private Room B. Private Room B was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan's skyline, the city sprawling beneath like a circuit board of light. The table was a single slab of reclaimed oak, surrounded by chairs that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. On the walls hung original oil paintings, old masters she noted with the automatic eye of her training. A small Vermeer study, a Caravaggio sketch, authenticated certainly, insured for millions. And at the head of the table sat Victor Ashworth. He was 72 years old, with silver hair swept back from a hawkish face. His suit was charcoal Savile Row, his watch a vintage Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Elena's entire debt. He had the bearing of a man who had never been told no in his life, or if he had simply purchased the person saying it. Around him sat his entourage. To his right, Dr. Heinrich Müller, a portly German with wire-rimmed glasses and a precisely trimmed beard. Elena recognized him from academic journals. He was a respected authenticator, a former curator at the Pergamon Museum, now a private consultant commanding fees in the six figures. To his left, a younger man, perhaps 40, with the sharp features and expensive haircut of old money. James Ashworth, Victor's son and heir apparent. He scrolled through his phone with the bored expression of someone who had never worked a day in his life. The remaining seats held lawyers, assistants, and a woman Elena didn't recognize, perhaps a dealer or gallery representative, judging by the careful neutrality of her expression. And in the center of the table, resting on a black velvet cloth, sat a small ceramic vessel. Elena's breath caught. It was an Attic lekathos, a Greek oil flask, perhaps 15 inches tall, painted in the red figure style. The surface depicted a funeral scene. Mourners gathered around a grave stele, their robes rendered in flowing terracotta lines against the black background. The style was unmistakably 5th century BCE, the kind of piece that belonged in the Metropolitan Museum. "Good evening," Elena said, stepping forward with her notepad. "Welcome to Le Magnifique. May I start you with some water or perhaps—" "Sparkling for the table," James Ashworth interrupted without looking up from his phone. "And whatever your most expensive champagne is. 2 bottles?" "Of course, sir," Elena made a note. "And for—" "We'll order when we're ready," James said. "Just bring the drinks." Victor Ashworth raised a hand, silencing his son. His eyes, pale blue, sharp as surgical instruments, fixed on Elena for a moment, assessing, calculating. Then he looked away, as if she had ceased to exist. "Dr. Müller," Victor said, his voice low and commanding. "Your assessment." The German authenticator leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. He spoke with the careful precision of academia, each word measured. "The piece is extraordinary, Herr Ashworth. The provenance documentation traces it through 3 major collections since 1847, the Hardington Estate in Kent, the DuPont Family Archive, and most recently, the Geneva Freeport. The thermoluminescence testing confirms the ceramic dates to approximately 440 BCE. The pigment analysis is consistent with Athenian workshop practices of the classical period." He paused, letting the weight of his expertise settle over the room. "In my professional opinion, this is an authentic example of the Achilles painter's workshop, one of fewer than 30 known to exist. Its value at auction would exceed $12 million. Victor Ashworth's expression didn't change. "And you're certain?" "I have authenticated over 400 pieces of Greek antiquity in my career," Dr. Müller said, a note of offense creeping into his voice. "My reputation is impeccable. I stake my professional standing on this assessment." Elena returned with the sparkling water and began filling glasses. She moved around the table with practiced efficiency, invisible as always. But as she reached past Dr. Müller to fill his glass, her eyes fell on the lekathos. Close now. Close enough to see. And something in her chest went cold. She finished pouring and stepped back. "Your champagne will be right out," she said. Her voice was steady, professional, giving nothing away. But her mind was racing. Victor Ashworth nodded to one of his lawyers. "Draft the purchase agreement. $8 million, as discussed. Dr. Müller's authentication satisfies due diligence." The gallery representative smiled. "Mr. Ashworth, you won't regret this acquisition. The Achilles painter's work is—" "I know what it is," Victor interrupted. "I've been collecting antiquities for 40 years. Elena left the room to retrieve the champagne. Her hands were shaking slightly as she uncorked the first bottle in the service corridor. She stared at the golden liquid filling the flute. "It's not your business," she told herself. "You're a waitress. You serve drinks. You don't get involved." But the image of the lekathos wouldn't leave her mind. The mourners painted on its surface, the flowing lines, and the one detail that didn't belong, the one impossible detail that Dr. Heinrich Müller, with his 40 years of expertise and impeccable reputation, had somehow missed. Elena stood in the service corridor, the champagne tray balanced in her hands. Her heart was pounding. Her palms were damp. Everything she had trained herself to suppress, the scholar's instinct, the expert's eye, the passionate certainty that had once defined her, was clawing its way to the surface. The lekathos was wrong. She had seen it in the fraction of a second when she'd leaned past Dr. Müller. Not the shape was perfect. Not the coloring The red figure technique was flawless. Not even the wear patterns, which showed exactly the kind of erosion you'd expect from 25 centuries of existence. It was the inscription. Barely visible along the base of the vessel, near the foot, was a tiny Greek phrase. Most collectors wouldn't notice it. Most authenticators wouldn't think twice about it. But Elena had spent 7 months studying the Achilles painter's workshop for her thesis. She had cataloged every known inscription, every signature, every maker's mark from that era. And the phrase on this lekythos was written in Koine Greek. Koine Greek, the common dialect that emerged after Alexander the Great's conquests, after 300 BCE, nearly 150 years after the Achilles painter's workshop had closed. It was like finding a medieval painting signed with a ballpoint pen. The vessel was a forgery, a brilliant forgery. Someone with real expertise had created it, but a forgery nonetheless. And Victor Ashworth was about to pay $8 million for it. Elena's hands tightened on the tray. "This isn't your problem," the practical voice in her head insisted. "These are billionaires playing billionaire games. If he gets scammed, so what? He'll write it off. He won't even notice $8 million. But another voice, older, fiercer, the voice of the woman she used to be, whispered something different. "You know the truth, and the truth matters." She pushed through the door and entered private room B. The conversation had shifted. The lawyers were passing documents around the table. The gallery representative was explaining shipping and insurance arrangements. Dr. Mueller was pontificating about proper conservation methods. And Victor Ashworth sat at the head of the table, watching everything with those cold, calculating eyes. Elena began serving the champagne. Her movements were automatic, muscle memory taking over, while her mind worked furiously. She needed to look again, to confirm. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the stress and exhaustion were playing tricks on her. Maybe 18 months of serving breadsticks to strangers had eroded her expertise. She set down a flute in front of James Ashworth and glanced at the lekythos. There it was, the inscription, clear as day now that she knew where to look. Poema, Kalon, a beautiful creation, written in Koine Greek, with a specific letter form, the lunate sigma, that didn't exist until the Hellenistic period. The forger had been clever, but not clever enough. They'd studied the Achilles painter's style, but they hadn't studied the evolution of the Greek alphabet. Elena's certainty solidified into something hard and cold. "The authentication certificate will be filed with the Antiquities Registry," Dr. Mueller was saying, "and I will personally oversee the provenance documentation for your insurance records, Herr Ashworth." "Good," Victor said. He reached for a pen. "Let's finalize this." Elena set down the last champagne flute. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Every instinct told her to walk away, to keep her head down, to survive. She had debt. She had rent. She had nothing. Nothing except the knowledge burning in her chest like a live coal. Victor Ashworth's pen touched paper, and Elena heard herself speak. "Wait." The word cut through the room like a blade. Every head turned toward her. James Ashworth's phone clattered to the table. Dr. Muller's mouth fell open. The gallery representative's careful composure cracked, revealing something like fear. Victor Ashworth's pen stopped moving. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time all evening. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was silk over steel. Elena's throat was dry. Her hands were shaking. But the scholar inside her, the woman who had once argued with tenured professors, who had defended her thesis against a panel of the world's most respected antiquarians, that woman stepped forward. "Don't sign that," Elena said. "The lekythos is a fake." Silence. Then James Ashworth laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Did the waitress just—" He looked around the table, incredulous. "Did she just try to tell us the piece is fake?" Dr. Muller's face flushed crimson. "This is absurd. I have authenticated this vessel using every established method. Thermoluminescence, spectroscopic analysis, provenance documentation spanning nearly 2 centuries. Who is this person?" "She's the help," James said, still laughing. "Dad, should I call management? This is ridiculous." But Victor Ashworth hadn't moved. His eyes remained fixed on Elena, that calculating gaze drilling into her. 3 seconds, he said quietly. The room fell silent again. "You looked at the piece for 3 seconds, Victor continued, while serving champagne, and in 3 seconds you concluded that a vessel authenticated by one of the world's foremost experts is a forgery." He set down his pen. "Explain." Elena felt the weight of every eye in the room. The lawyers had stopped shuffling papers. The gallery representative's hands were gripping the edge of the table, knuckles white. James Ashworth's smirk was frozen on his face, caught between contempt and confusion. And Dr. Muller, Dr. Heinrich Muller, the man who had authenticated 400 pieces of Greek antiquity, was staring at her with undisguised hostility. But it was Victor Ashworth's gaze that held her, patient, expectant. The look of a man who had learned, over 7 decades, that surprises came from the most unlikely places. Elena stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. The vessel is a modern forgery, created within the last 50 years, probably by someone trained in classical techniques. The aging, the wear patterns, the pigment composition. All of that can be faked with the right materials and expertise. But the forger made one mistake. She pointed at the lekythos. "May I?" Victor nodded. Elena approached the table. She could feel Dr. Muller's fury radiating like heat from a furnace. But she didn't falter. She lifted the vessel carefully, her training automatic, her grip precise, and rotated it so the base was visible. "Here," she said, "along the foot, there's an inscription, very small, easy to miss if you're not looking for it." Dr. Muller leaned forward, squinting. "I see nothing remarkable. A maker's mark, perhaps, common in workshop pieces." "The words themselves aren't remarkable," Elena agreed. "Poema kalon, a beautiful creation. What's remarkable is how they're written." She set the vessel down and looked directly at Dr. Muller. "The inscription uses a lunate sigma. Do you know when the lunate sigma merged in Greek writing, Dr. Muller?" The German's face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "The Hellenistic period," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. "After Alexander the Great, after 300 BCE. The Achilles painter's workshop closed around 425 BCE, more than a century before the lunate sigma existed. An authentic piece from this workshop would use the classical sigma form, always, without exception." She paused, letting the words settle. "Furthermore, the phrase itself, poema kalon, is Koine Greek, the common dialect that spread across the Mediterranean world after Alexander's conquests. In 440 BCE, an Athenian craftsman wouldn't have used that phrase. The grammatical construction didn't exist yet. He would have used Attic Greek, ergon kalon perhaps, or techni, kale. The language itself is wrong." Dr. Muller's face had gone from pale to ashen. This is someone who studied the Achilles painter's visual style," Elena said, "but didn't study the linguistic history of ancient Greece. They knew how to make the vessel look authentic. They didn't know how to make it read authentic." The room was silent. Then James Ashworth laughed again. But this time, there was an edge of hysteria to it. "This is insane! She's a waitress. You're going to take the word of a waitress over Dr. Muller?" "Dr. Muller," Victor Ashworth said quietly, "would you care to respond?" The authenticator had retrieved his glasses and was examining the base of the vessel with trembling hands. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The inscription, I must have..." He looked up, his eyes wild. "This proves nothing. The inscription could have been added later, a restoration perhaps, or a catalog marking from a previous collection." "Added later?" Elena's voice was sharp. "Look at the glaze. The inscription is under the glaze, Dr. Muller. It was fired into the ceramic when the piece was made. That's not a restoration marking. That's the forger's signature, hidden where they thought no one would look." Dr. Muller's mouth worked soundlessly. "And while we're at it," Elena continued, "let's discuss the provenance. You mentioned the Hardington estate as the earliest documented owner, 1847. But the Hardington collection records were destroyed in a fire in 1892. There's no surviving documentation, which means the provenance chain you're relying on starts in a void. Someone created that paper trail to give this forgery legitimacy." She turned to the gallery representative. The woman's face had gone the color of curdled milk. "You knew, didn't you?" Elena asked softly. "Or, at least, you suspected. You priced it at $8 million, less than the $12 million Dr. Muller estimated, because you needed the buyer to feel like they were getting a deal. You needed them to close fast, before anyone looked too closely." The gallery representative stood abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. I'm leaving." "Sit down." Victor Ashworth's voice cracked across the room like a whip. The woman froze mid-step. "You will sit down," Victor repeated, each word carved from ice. "You will sit down, and you will not move until I tell you to move. Am I understood?" The woman sat. Victor turned to one of his lawyers. Call security. No one leaves this room until I say so. He looked at Elena. You. Continue. Elena felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, the awareness of how small she was in this room full of powerful people. But beneath it, something stronger was rising, the fierce, bright certainty of being right. The forgery is sophisticated, she said. It would fool most buyers. It fooled a respected authenticator. She glanced at Dr. Muller, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair. But it's not perfect. No forgery ever is. The question is whether Dr. Muller missed the inscription by accident or whether he was paid to miss it. Dr. Muller's head snapped up. How dare you? I have built my reputation over 40 years. Your reputation authenticated this forgery, Elena said flatly. Without your certification, this piece would never have made it to this table. $8 million was at stake. How much was your fee, Dr. Muller? 10%? 15%? The German's face twisted with rage. You ungrateful little... You're nothing. A serving girl with delusions of expertise. Do you know who I am? I will destroy you. I will make certain you never work in any capacity again. Enough. Victor Ashworth's voice silenced the room. He rose from his chair. 72 years old, but in that moment, he seemed carved from granite. He walked slowly around the table, past his son, past the lawyers, past the cowering gallery representative, until he stood before Dr. Muller. Heinrich, he said quietly, we've known each other for 20 years. You've authenticated a dozen pieces from my collection. I trusted you. Dr. Muller's eyes darted around the room, searching for escape that didn't exist. The young woman asked a question, Victor continued. I'd like to hear the answer. How much was your fee? Silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, 800,000. The room seemed to contract. 10%, Victor said. You sold your reputation and your integrity for 10% of a scam. He turned to the gallery representative. And you? Who made the piece? I want a name. The woman was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I don't know. I swear I was just told to sell it. You'll tell my lawyers everything you do know, Victor said. And then you'll tell the authorities, because I promise you, I will burn down every network, every gallery, every contact you have if you don't cooperate completely. He looked at Dr. Muller. As for you, your career is over. By morning, every major collector on 3 continents will know what you've done. You'll never authenticate so much as a postcard again. Security arrived within minutes. 2 men in dark suits with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had handled difficult situations before. They stood by the door, blocking any exit, while Victor Ashworth's lawyers began making calls. The police, the FBI's art crime division, insurance investigators. A web of consequences spreading outward from this single room. Dr. Heinrich Muller sat motionless in his chair, his face the color of old paper. 40 years of reputation, 40 years of careful cultivation, gone in an instant. He didn't speak. He didn't protest. The fight had left him the moment he'd confessed the fee. The gallery representative was still crying, her careful composure shattered. Between sobs, she was giving one of the lawyers names, dates, account numbers. Everything she knew about the network that had produced the forgery. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start pulling threads. Get them out of my sight, Victor said finally. Security escorted Dr. Muller and the gallery representative from the room. The German walked like a man going to his execution, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look at Elena as he passed. He couldn't. The door closed behind them. In the silence that followed, the remaining people in the room seemed to collectively exhale. James Ashworth was staring at his father with an expression of shock. The lawyers were murmuring to each other, already calculating the legal and reputational fallout. And Elena stood alone by the table, her hands clasped in front of her, suddenly aware of her uniform, her apron, the tray she had abandoned on the service station. A waitress in a room full of billionaires. But she had just saved one of those billionaires $8 million. The realization hit her like a wave. Her knees went weak. She reached out and gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. Victor Ashworth turned to face her. For a long moment, Victor Ashworth simply looked at her. The cold calculation in his eyes had shifted to something else. Something Elena couldn't quite identify. It might have been curiosity. It might have been respect. It might have been the look of a man who had just discovered a diamond in a pile of gravel. "Who are you?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Elena thought about lying, deflecting, returning to the comfortable invisibility of her uniform and her tray. She thought about the debt collectors, the hospital bills, the apartment she could barely afford. She thought about survival, But the woman who had just dismantled a $1 million fraud in front of a room full of strangers, that woman was done hiding. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said. "I have a master's degree in art history and archaeological studies from the Sorbonne. My thesis was on the workshop production methods of 5th century BCE Athenian ceramics, with a particular focus on the Achilles painter and his circle. I spent 3 months in the British Museum's restricted archives cataloging Byzantine manuscripts, and another 6 months as a research fellow at the Getty, specializing in forgery detection." She paused. The next words were harder. 2 years ago, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I left my fellowship to care for her. The medical bills, we didn't have insurance, not the right kind. I used everything I had, sold everything I owned. By the time she died, I was $130,000 in debt, with no career, no savings, and no prospects. Her voice didn't waver. The grief was there, would always be there, but she had learned to carry it without breaking. I applied to museums, galleries, auction houses. No one was hiring. Or if they were, they wanted someone with connections, someone who came from the right family. I didn't have any of that, so I took the only job I could get, and for 18 months, I've been serving champagne to people who look right through me. She met Victor Ashworth's gaze. "That's who I am, Mr. Ashworth. I'm a scholar who became a waitress because the world doesn't care about expertise, only credentials and connections and money. I'm someone who's been invisible for so long that I almost forgot I was ever anything else." Victor was silent. Then he did something that surprised everyone in the room. He laughed, not cruelly, not dismissively. It was a genuine laugh, deep, warm, the kind of sound Elena hadn't expected from a man who had seemed carved from ice. "Do you know," he said, "I've spent 40 years building one of the finest antiquities collections in private hands. I've worked with authenticators, dealers, auction houses, museums. I've met hundreds of experts, people with impeccable credentials and impressive resumes." He shook his head slowly. "And none of them, not one, has ever spotted a forgery that quickly. 3 seconds, and you saw what Dr. Heinrich Müller, with 40 years of experience, missed entirely." He gestured to the fake lekythos, still sitting on its velvet cloth. "That piece was a test." Elena stared at him. "A test?" "I suspected Müller was compromised. There had been inconsistencies in some of his recent authentications, but I couldn't prove anything without catching him in the act. So I arranged this little theater piece." He smiled, a thin, wolfish smile. "What I didn't expect was for someone else to solve the puzzle before I had to reveal it myself." He turned to his son, who was still staring at Elena with something approaching wonder. "James, clear my schedule for tomorrow morning. I need to have a conversation with Ms. Vasquez." The next morning, Elena sat in a leather chair in Victor Ashworth's private office on the 53rd floor of Ashworth Tower. The view was dizzying. All of Manhattan spread beneath her like a circuit board of power and ambition. The office itself was a museum. Greek bronzes, Roman marble, Egyptian faience, Ming Dynasty porcelain. A lifetime of collecting, arranged with the care of a curator and the resources of a billionaire. Victor sat across from her, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. "I've made some calls," he said. "Your credentials check out. Summa cum laude at Columbia, top of your class at the Sorbonne. The British Museum speaks very highly of you. Apparently, you found an attribution error in their Byzantine collection that they'd missed for 60 years. Elena said nothing. She was still trying to process the fact that she was here at all. "I also checked on your debt," Victor continued. $127,000, most of it in medical bills and defaulted student loans. You've been paying the minimum every month, which means you'll be in debt for the next 30 years. "I'm aware," Elena said quietly. Victor set down his coffee. "I'd like to make you an offer, Ms. Vasquez. I'm creating a new position within Ashworth Holdings, Director of Antiquities Authentication. You would oversee every acquisition I make. You would have full authority to approve or reject any piece, any dealer, any authentication. Your word would be final." Elena's heart stopped. "The salary would be $400,000 annually, plus performance bonuses tied to successful forgery detection. You would also receive health insurance, a retirement plan, and a housing allowance. As a signing bonus, I would pay off your existing debt in full." She couldn't speak. The numbers were swimming in her head, impossible to process. Victor leaned forward. "I've watched people underestimate brilliance my entire career. I've seen talent wasted because it didn't come in the right package, with the right connections, from the right family. I won't make that mistake." He paused. "But I'm not offering you charity, Ms. Vasquez. I'm offering you this because you're the best. You spotted a forgery in 3 seconds that fooled a world-renowned expert. That's not luck, that's mastery. Elena found her voice. It was rough, barely above a whisper. I have conditions. Victor raised an eyebrow. Name them. Full decision-making authority on all acquisitions. No one overrules me. Not your lawyers, not your son, not you. If I say a piece is questionable, we don't buy it. Period. Agreed. I want ethical sourcing protocols. No pieces with questionable provenance. No artifacts that might have been looted from cultural heritage sites. I won't be part of the antiquities black market, no matter how valuable the piece. Victor nodded slowly. That's fair and difficult, but fair. Elena took a breath. This was the part that mattered most. I want you to establish a scholarship fund, full tuition plus living expenses, for students from underrepresented backgrounds pursuing degrees in art history, archaeology, or museum studies. 3 scholarships a year, renewable for 4 years. She met his eyes. I want it named after my mother, the Maria Elena Vasquez Memorial Scholarship. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Something softer, more human than the calculating coldness she had seen before. Done, he said. I'll fund it personally. $10 million as an initial endowment. Elena's eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry. Then I accept, she said. Victor Ashworth stood and extended his hand. Welcome to Ashworth Holdings, Ms. Vasquez. She took his hand. Her grip was firm. Elena, she said, call me Elena. There is a particular kind of cruelty in being invisible. Not the invisibility of absence, but the invisibility of presence. To be seen and yet not seen. To stand in a room full of power, holding brilliance in your hands, and have everyone look through you as though you were made of glass. Elena Vasquez knew that cruelty. She had lived it. For 18 months, carrying trays and refilling glasses while the world pretended she didn't exist. She had buried her gifts, silenced her expertise, and tried to convince herself that survival was enough. But here is the truth that the powerful often forget. Brilliance doesn't disappear just because the world ignores it. Knowledge doesn't fade just because no one asks for it. And the invisible woman in the corner, the one you dismissed, the one you assumed was nothing more than a servant, she is still watching, still learning, still waiting. 3 seconds. That's all it took for Elena to see what 40 years of expertise had missed. 3 seconds to expose a fraud, unravel a conspiracy, and change her life forever. Because in the end, it is not wealth that protects us from deception. It is not power that reveals the truth. It is knowledge, hard-won, carefully cultivated, carried through grief and struggle and invisibility. The next time you look at someone and see only their uniform, their circumstance, their apparent station in life, remember Elena. Remember that the most powerful person in the room isn't always the one at the head of the table. Sometimes it's the one serving the champagne.